All right, so let's talk about Git. So, okay, so I'm going to go into this repository or this directory right now, Git, and this is where most of this stuff, I actually need to push this up and we'll talk about it. So I know we talked about quite a few like very quick things last time about Git. So we're gonna go into a little more detail and then hopefully we can get into some more advanced stuff too. And we also have a little activity. So I just wanna pull up these stuff so I make sure I go through all those parts. All right, so the first thing with Git, our intro. So Git is basically a version control system. So kind of a quick knowledge check. Why do you think, well, I should first tell you what a version control system is. A version control system is essentially just keeping your steps of like what has been changed. Basically saying, oh, I made this change, you know, this is kind of like what's going on. And like you can see what those lists of changes are. Why do you think this is important? Like what kind of use cases do we have? Like why do we care about like, you know, not just saving the file, but like the history of the file saves?
So if any mistakes are made, you can go back to a previous version of the file. And then if, yeah, and then in collaborating, that's good too. If somebody changes something and it breaks it, it can be changed back.
Yes, big thing is like you can see what you've done. And especially if you break something, you can see like what changed. Like it's like, oh, I knew this worked before and then I saved over it. You're like, why did it change? So version control is really nice. It's very like, how do I say this? Like, I think sometimes people don't use it as much as they should, including like professional, you know, software developers, professional data scientists. So my goal for you guys is to make sure you guys use version control consistently. I would rather you like, you can think of it like meta saving. It's like, it's not just saving like the file, it's like saving what you saved. So that's kind of like what the version control system is. Cool. And there's a few other use cases, like you said, like with collaboration, right? So if you're collaborating with someone, you can see what other people have done. There's different use case or different version control systems, but we're mostly going to talk about Git. So Git is kind of one of the more popular ones right now. You might have seen before, like depending, you know, like if you've used other things, Subversion. This is not as popular right now and has been kind of like, what's it called? A little bit kind of outdated now. It's like for most people who use Git. So that's what we're mostly going to talk about. The other side, which is what I see a lot of people still do, even with Git, is basically renaming their files into like final 2, final, you know, for the real time and stuff like this. I'm sure like at some point you guys have all done this, whether it's with Word docs or something else. This is not the best thing because you really don't know what the final is and it doesn't really tell you what the changes are. And also one big thing about this is that you can't easily see what the changes you made just by, like there's not a really good easy way to do this. Git basically allows you to make these changes and also compare these changes. So you can kind of see what has changed and stuff like that. So it's actually a really great one. Subversion and some other version control systems basically will lock out like the file and say, oh, only so-and-so is working on this file, so no one else can work on this right now. And they have to wait for it to be released and then you'll be able to grab it, which you can think for collaboration, you know, might be really useful in some cases where like you don't want anyone to touch it. But and there are other cases where you're like, you want to be able to people work on it simultaneously and then combine their work together, and Git's really useful for this. So you'll see a lot of people use Git in this way. And this is why also Git tends to be used on open source, which is why a lot of open source projects live on GitHub or GitLab or some kind of Git version. Okay, cool. So that's kind of a quick introduction of why we use Git. Also, Git's just super common. Basically, like if you look at, I think I have this little link here for Stack Overflow. Like I think they kind of look at like version controls, like what like they ask people. Git is easily like the most popular version. You see Subversions still being used, and then you see people using other different ways of doing stuff. Yeah, I like the people who don't use version control. Like I don't know what thing they're doing. But you can easily see Git is pretty used universally. Okay, so also one thing, this little comic, I actually think the curriculum shows this comic too. This comic's from XKCD. Basically, everyone uses Git and people are like, oh, it's really great for projects. And there's so much of just like memorizing what things go. It's like, I don't know, git add, git push, git commit, git push, git pull. I don't know what it does, but it just does what it needs to and it just works. This is honestly, a lot of people, including myself very early on, is that I did not know how Git worked. I didn't really get the point of it. I just knew that this is the thing that people did. You'll see this very commonly. And so my goal for you guys is to kind of like get used to it, right? and then you'll develop more and more familiarity with Git and knowing how to do that workflow. Okay, so the basic workflow. So this is what, if you're going to take anything from this whole talk about Git, is to know this, is that basically there are 3 parts on a Git commit stage. Okay, we have our working area, our staging area, and our repository. So basically you can think of it like you are on your computer, you're doing changes, you're saving files, making changes, saving it, making changes, saving it. And then you're like, okay, that's my working directory. That's where you're working all this stuff. And then you say, hey, I made this major change. I want to make sure I kind of like bookmark that I made this change. So note that this change could be like one file. It could be multiple functions. It could be multiple files. Like you can change a bunch of things at once and say, okay, I want a bookmark saying I made a conceptual change here, something that's important enough to actually save. That's when you would do something called git add, and that moves it to something called the staging area. And so you can think of the staging area now as kind of like, okay, I'm going to save this bookmark. I'm going to save this somewhere. So it's kind of like your meta save, right? So your file's already saved. You do git add on like certain files, and you say, okay, I'm going to soon bookmark this whole part. So you can actually git add over time. Like for example, it's like, oh, I made a change to this file, git add, make change to another file, git add that file, or you can do git add multiple files and whatnot. Okay, so then you have your staging area. It's like, okay, your staging area is all set. And now you're like, all right, I'm going to commit to this history change. And that's where we do git commit. You're kind of like committing, saying, all right, this is a change, like a conceptual change that makes sense. I'm going to commit this and then save this as one of my history of commits. Okay, so that's kind of like going from staging area here. So we do a git commit, and this right here is going to write it to the history of our repository. Our repository, you can think of it as kind of like the directory of like your particular project that you're working on. So like you hear me say repo or repository, that's really what we're talking about, the thing that you're changing through. And this git commit is kind of like adding it to the history of all the other bookmarks. So that way you can see all the other bookmarks and you can always jump back to it, compare the bookmarks and stuff like this. If you don't do a git add and then a git commit, this history, like even just to save like your normal like Jupyter notebook or whatever you do, this isn't get added to the history. So you have to make sure that you actually do this git add to the staging area. And then from the staging area, commit to that change on the, basically your history of like all of your git commits. Okay, does that make sense to people? Okay, so one thing to note from this is that you have to make sure if you want the thing to be added into your history, you have to do this git add, git commit. If you don't do that, it doesn't necessarily it's not going to be added to your history. The other part is that if you do add something to your history and you put it on here, it does not go away if you just do a new git add, git commit. Because basically, if you have a file in there, let's say you made, you put your password in a file and you do a git add, git commit on that file, and you add in there, like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that, and you like overwrite that file, with something else that's not your password, and do a git add, git commit. You will no longer see your password with the working directory, but that history is still there. Someone can still go back to that bookmark, and still look at that file. So just be aware of this kind of thing. Just is that if you do make those kind of like little mistakes and stuff like this, there are more advanced ways to do it. But at this stage, to be honest, if you're like, I was like, oh my gosh, I did something like really, really drastic. Like I put like, my social security number or something like on like, my git commit or something like that. Easiest thing right now, let me know. Like, let me know and say, hey, I need help with this. If you're feeling really advanced stuff like that and you get more comfortable, obviously, you can take care of it, but it's kind of a little tricky and we might be able to talk about today. If not, maybe we can spend another time talking about ways to kind of sort through these commits. And basically, essentially what you have to do is rewrite history. And that can be kind of tricky sometimes. Okay. But anyway, you have your working directory, your staging area, and your git commit. So the overall kind of look at this is that you kind of type it on your computer. You're like, this is a great notebook. I want to preserve this information because I added a new section on like data cleaning. Cool. You would then do git add of your file or file names. So you can add multiple files, the file name and all that stuff. Then you would do your git commit. Note that if you do git commit and then don't put the -m in the message, what will happen is that it will open up an editor, whether that's your, if you already configured it, it could be actually on your command line, or it can be whatever is the default editor for Git. And it will open that up and say, oh, now you can type your message. This is just a very quick way, since most of the time your Git commits are like less than 50 characters and should be relatively short. Everyone has their different style guide of exactly, excuse me, different style guide of like exactly what they want to write down. So just know that this message is basically a really quick way to write down what you want to say, like, oh, I changed this. Note that the bad messages, I will tell you, are things that are like, I made changes or fixed an error. Like those things are not really super like descriptive. And also that's like most commits. People see, I like to try to break it down into 3 parts. There is a feature, I made a new feature. I have a new documentation. So maybe I changed up the documentation of like, this description of what's going on here. So nothing like code base or something along like functional, but like I changed up the docs, maybe I changed my README or something like that. And my third one is I refactor. And refactor might means I like effectively does the same thing, but I kind of rearrange things, clean things up and stuff like that. I guess the fourth one would be fix. So like I fixed an error that was like previously in there. And usually what I would do is for my Git messages, I'll usually put something like feature, and then I'll type in like, a description of the features, like, add new, I don't know, let's say add new function to clean data. I make something on the fly. I'm not creative. So anyways, that would be like my feature and then put this part in here. And this way it makes it really easy for me to like find the commits and know what happens. If I do a feature versus I do like docs, if I do like a refactor, I'll kind of refact like this, just know like, oh, it's changed. And then I'll put like fix. This is something I learned like many years ago. This is not like, the common way or like this standard that everyone does. But I find that if I do it this way, it usually puts me in the right mind frame of like, okay, these are the things I'm adding to it. Okay. Yes, so that's your git commit with your message. Any questions on that message part? Okay, cool. And then once you have that, you actually want to push your commit. Now this part right here is kind of optional, but this tends to be like your workflow. You'll make your changes, do your commit, and then you'll push. And that push usually means that you're connecting it to like GitHub, like a remote repository. And that makes sure that your GitHub repo and your repo are synced up with each other. Note that you can do multiple commits. You can do git add, git commit, make some changes, git add, git commit, and all that, and then push at the very end, and it'll just push up all of your commits at once. Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of like the overall workflow. A few things that can be useful are Git Status. So Git Status basically says, what everything is in its current state. So I'm going to show you a little quick terminal. So you'll note that we are in this directory right here. If I do Git Status, and I'll let you know, I have a lot of changes in here. So if I do Git Status, you'll see is that it kind of gives you a little bit of like what's in your kind of like what things have been changed, what things you have changed but need to like add into it. So these are files that have never been added to my history at all. But these are ones that have been added to my history but haven't been committed yet. Note that I have a lot of changes right here. Oh, it's not as bad as I thought. I thought I had a lot more. So I can do a git add here. So let's say I want to change up this command line. I can do git add command line. Oops. Where am I? Yeah. Command line, and then Unix, and then command like this. And then if I do git status, you'll see that this right here says, hey, changes to be committed, right? So these are kind of like in my staging area right now. All of this stuff right here is in my working directory. So this is not going to be changed and all that stuff. And so note that this says, hey, like this is in your, staging area, all set and ready to commit. If I wanted to commit, then I would do git commit and do my message, so I like message or whatever it is, right? And then save that, and then that will go away. So after I do a git commit, this will disappear. Let's say it's like, oh, wait, I didn't want to do this. Like I didn't mean to add this file in here. You can just do git reset, and you'll see now that goes away here. And what that does, it doesn't actually get rid of your like changes. It'll just get it out of the staging area. So that way you can change up, like add new files in there or make a new change and do git add. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. So git status is super useful. All right, git diff, I won't go into the full details of that. Basically, it can show you a little bit of like difference of what your current directory is versus other ones. You can also compare different commits, like basically different history points. Then git log. So git log can be really useful, kind of see what you've done. So if I do git log here on this repo, you can actually see each one of these things are a separate commit. So from this yellow to this part right here. And so git log has a lot of information, right? So we're gonna break this down, like let's say talk about this one right here. So this Git log basically is saying, all right, this is a commit, and this is what we call its special unique ID, its hash or its SHA. Basically, it's a special, it's a unique ID that basically, I won't go into the full details of this, but basically it's like a way to represent like, oh, these are the changes that have been made. And we usually call this like, its hash. So it has a unique ID, and note that no commit has the same ID. As you can tell, it can have numbers and letters in it. You'll see the author in here. So that's kind of the user that's being used here. You'll see my username or my emails right here that I use for Git. And then you also see the date of this commit as well. So like when I actually committed this. So you can see here, I did this earlier today, but if I go back over here, you can actually see something back from Thursday. So you can see my different commits. And then you can see here is my Git commit message. So note that basically I have a feature here. I talk about more details on Git branches and a little bit more details. You can see some extra stuff down here as well. Okay. Now, if you look carefully, you'll probably notice that this commit right here, there's some little extra information. And you can see here is that basically is kind of like my edge of the branch. So usually you'll be working off of this part. And what this is basically saying is like, hey, this is where you are currently working on. This is your head. This is basically, if I make a new commit, it'll just be added on top of here. And then it's just saying, oh, what branch is called. In this case, we'll talk about branches in a second, is my curriculum, version 2.1. And then you'll see here is also this origin curriculum version 2.1. And this basically is my connection to GitHub, my remote repo. It doesn't have to be GitHub, but it's a remote repo. Basically, it's the thing that's syncing up and it's saying, oh, this is also where this lives. Sometimes if you make a change and haven't pushed it yet, this right here will actually appear lower down, like maybe on another commit. When you do a git push, you'll see it then pop up to where you currently are. Note that down here, I also have some other branches as well that are kind of like in the past. So I haven't changed this up yet. I haven't merged it as we will talk about. Okay. Cool. Yeah, so this is kind of like a quick Git log. This is kind of like how to look at it. Any questions on that? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So can the commits be referenced by their numbers or something, by their IDs?
Yeah, that's right. They can be referenced. So you can actually check out, we'll talk about checkout in a second.
Okay, cool.
But basically you can reference those things and actually compare them. So one thing you can do, let's say I'm going to just copy this guy. And note that you don't have to copy the whole commit unique ID. You can essentially look at the first few ones as long as it's unique. So I wouldn't just copy like N3 or 9.3 because there might be another 9.3, but usually like the first 4 or 5, like that would be unique enough. So note that I can kind of scroll through my whole log here. If I click Q here, and let's go and clear this. I can do git diff of this commit, and this will show me the differences that I've made between now, the current one on my head, versus that commit in the past. And you can see here, I've added new, I took off some parts in here, I added new things. Unfortunately, I will tell you is that Jupyter Notebook and Git they just haven't figured it out yet. So you'll see that there's a whole bunch of stuff. You're like, what? I didn't type all this stuff. Like, what's going on? Unfortunately, Git's showing you all the different changes in your IPNB, your notebook, has these internal changes in the text that you normally don't have to see. So if you look at like, this file, you'll see that like, hey, I don't see any of that weird extra stuff. It's because Jupyter Notebook is looking at that file, showing it to you, but it's in the background. But it can still be really useful to find exact changes that you've done. Also, if you have like, if you run a cell and you have like some kind of display, sometimes you'll see this like weird, like, I don't think I have an example here, but you'll sometimes see like this weird, like, bunch of letters and numbers and stuff like that. That's just the output. That's kind of like being compressed. Yeah. You can definitely answer your question, Jessica. Yes, you can reference a specific commit. Cool. All right. So it's slower than I thought it was. I'm trying to compress all this information and give it to you guys. So we'll see if we get to the activity. Probably not, but we'll see. All right. So this is the Git Basics. Any questions about this other, the workflow and all that stuff? I think for the most part, you guys pretty much probably have been doing this for a little bit. That seem accurate? Yeah, give me a thumbs up if you guys have already done like a git add, git commit. Cool, awesome. All right.